We resume the debate on the proposition as amended. Does any motion speak on the proposition? Deputy Ward.
Let's get my button working post-lunch. Thank you, sir. So I'd just like to say about Deputy Kovac's proposition here, and that is that I totally agree with the sentiment. I think none of us in the Assembly feel that rental stress it's a really serious issue, and absolutely right to be paying attention to it. So just to move on, though, I've been some interesting debates and some interesting commentary here, and I'd just like to remind the Housing Minister, because it almost seems like this is some new territory for him. Back on P31 2021, housing affordability actions to be taken by the Government of Jersey, they included rent stabilisation, a timetable included as well for July 2021 to deliver on his proposition as well. So the current housing minister already knows there was an issue way back in 2021. It's surprising that he now needs a backbencher to drive him to action on this occasion. I'm also very concerned about the housing minister saying he's working all by himself, that somehow other ministers can't cooperate with him. He doesn't have the power to ask minister to cooperate with him. When I was housing minister, I had the environment minister on board in terms of trying to get greenfields sorted out with regard to planning matters. I had the infrastructure minister on board because we had a drainage issue. It's a cross-ministerial issue. Housing is just not the housing minister's remit. It's everybody's worry and everybody's concern. So I'm just slightly worried that the housing minister feels that he's quite so siloed at this moment in time. To go back to Deputy Kovac's commentary about cost recovery, yes, it is about cost recovery. There are incredible costs involved in trying to make sure we get a well-developed social housing provision which doesn't fall back into the trap of where we were when it was all government run and it was the dripping tap scenario. And that's taken a vast sums of money and vast amounts of resources to get there. Another commentary made was about £10 million going into the private sector. Well, I'd refer that to Deputy Joseph's commentary. Well, that's actually a building issue. That's a supply issue. If we can't supply sufficient homes, therefore we can't open up the gateway sufficiently for people, therefore we need the private sector to support us. The private sector, to mitigate this issue around rental stress, we have to make a payout. Sadly, that is £10 million. Now, if we develop policies appropriately, then that number will no doubt reduce. At the beginning, I thought Deputy Tadier should be the next housing minister. However, his broken model theory kicked that one into the long grass, I'm afraid. But the harsh reality about all of this is business as usual for the housing minister. This isn't anything special. This is business as usual. And thank you to Deputy Jeune for pulling out my previous policy. And actually, that was what we were trying to do, is review these policies, because they constantly need reviewing, because things are dynamic, things change. So that is absolutely the purview of the housing minister to be doing. So it's rather depressing, actually, to be even having this debate when the housing minister should already be doing this stuff. So I find that rather sad. Just to put this into big number perspectives, Andium currently have 4,800 tenants. 58% of them, that's 2,800 tenants, already have all of their housing need covered by the current setup. And also it's been pointed out to me that the average rent paid by an Andium, someone resident in Andium, is around 70%. So although we have an 80% cap on Andium, the average household is paying 70%. And I think that's, again, reflects the fact that there are an awful lot of people paying an awful lot less than 70%. So, we do need the housing, we need income support, absolutely. And yesterday, just the other point being made about the dividend being paid by Andium to the Treasury Minister. I mean, that's again a very tricky thing. It's a difficult political decision, but the Treasury Minister was absolutely clear yesterday. She's not going to move until somebody says, where's another 50 million, another 30 million, or I'd say actually it's nearer 15 million because a lot of this is wooden dollars. but where is that money going to come from in order to finance other issues? Are we going to put taxes up in other areas? So I talk about all of these different areas. And we're very, very well aware of them all. You know, right-sizing policies, better efficient use of housing within the housing stock of Andium. One sort of stat which really always bugged me was 2% of the families who live in Andium homes are in the top quintile of earners on this island. And my question is what are we doing about that? So there are lots of tweaks and things that can be done, but the most important thing is we cannot break the Andium model. We can play with things on the edges, but the model is the model right now, and it's very, very difficult to do a huge amount more. I absolutely empathise with people who are in rental stress, totally empathise with that, and we've got to try and minimise that number as much as we can, and we do that by such things as opening the gateway, policies which I brought in, which was also about reducing the age of access, which thankfully the current housing minister continued on that route with. He also continued on the route of the policy of increasing the extent of the gateway so that people's income levels. I recognised very early on that the restriction on the gateway was too much and too many people were falling out and not getting access to housing. So we're trying at the people who are most vulnerable in the island are already being catered for, and very, very high level of concern is being aimed at them. And so, as I say, I just come back to this whole point this is business as usual for the housing minister. It's nothing special. And I find it deeply disappointing that a backbencher has had to bring forward such a proposition. Thank you.
Sir, may I raise the defo on the Constable of St Clement, sir, who's joining us online? Thank you, sir.
Content to raise the defo on the Constable? The defo is raised. Does any other member wish to speak on this proposition? Deputy Renniff.
Thank you, sir. So we've had a much longer and more thorough debate than would have been the case if the amendment hadn't been separately debated. And I hope that those members who have expressed perhaps some exasperation with the debate will in the end come to welcome that. I certainly recall many occasions where members of Reform Jersey have championed the importance of debate in this assembly, and I certainly don't dissent from that, and that I hope that once the dust has settled, they will agree that it was useful to have a debate rather than wave through the amended proposition. I want to make clear that I support the idea of a review. I have no problem with that at all. It's a very important issue. I just didn't realise a proposition was needed to make it happen, since it's already in the Common Strategic Policy, and as Deputy Churn pointed out, the Minister had already committed to doing one in a meeting of scrutiny. The debate about the amendment was about whether we go a bit further and have a more substantive debate on hard policy choices. And it was worth having on many levels. One outcome of the debate was that it exposed considerable tensions within government over social rent policy and the funding model for social housing providers. So I think the debate we've had, thanks to Deputy Curtis, has been useful. But now we are debating the amended proposition, which is generally fairly anodyne. And so, as I say, I will support it. But since others have raised broader issues that relate to the general issue of cost of housing, and I confess I've been triggered, I'm going to address some of them as well. Deputy Ozef made the point that house prices have fallen and that the market is dysfunctional. But I would say they are still way, way higher relative to average earnings than they were even 15 years ago, and I checked that over the lunch break. Housing affordability did increase last year, with the fall in prices coinciding with a rise in average earning. So for all Deputy Ozef's talk of crisis, that is a good outcome. But affordability is still very poor. House prices still need to fall further if we're going to make houses affordable to more people. And that would bring down rents in the private sector and therefore, of course, in the social housing sector. Now, it might cause other problems, but all that does is emphasise that tackling housing affordability is a highly complex matter with multiple interactions, and it won't just be solved by ripping up the island plan and building on lots of green fields, quite apart from the other policy considerations that might be engaged with that to happen. I would say that island plans are not just for Christmas. They are long-term planning documents, and stability around them is important. There's not a member of this assembly who won't disagree with something in the island plan, myself included. But in the longer term, we will do ourselves no favours by repeatedly attempting to relitigate issues that were lost in an island plan debate just because we disagree with them. Stability in planning is important, and following the processes laid out in the planning law is also important. Another point that was made is that transactions have fallen. Yes, they did, but they are now rising again. I think that crisis has passed as interest rates have started to fall. The buy-to-let surcharge is there to reduce the risk that cash-rich landlords are able to bid up the price of housing to the detriment of owner-occupiers. In an island with no capital gains tax and no inheritance tax, and where over the long term house prices have risen significantly above earnings and inflation, property is a high-quality investment. The surcharge is intended to rebalance the market towards owner-occupiers by reducing investor demand. That's the intention. I have to say it looks like it's working, and I hope the Housing Minister will stick to his guns on that. We all have an interest in increasing housing supply for affordability of housing and for rents. Greenfields are certainly going to be a part of the answer, rezoning greenfields. But the obsession with rezoning as the only solution is misguided. There is one supply-side policy that could work to increase supply relatively quickly. We could tackle the hundreds of empty houses already connected to the utilities, already with planning permissions, already built and sitting empty. So I hope the Minister remembers his commitment to that as well. My fellow Deputy for St Brillard, moving on a bit, decries a rabble of a supposed opposition. I don't know if he intended to include me in that definition. Deputy Mesick thinks he should. He did so, of course, without knowing whether or not I was actually going to oppose, who was actually going to oppose the vote, and whether there was an opposition. So say I'm actually going to support it. But I would also go further and say I'm not part of any opposition. I have supported ministers on many issues, just now in this speech, in fact. But on others, I have policy disagreements. That's not a fault in the machine or a failure in the system. It's called being an independent. But on the basis that we're voting for something that we've already agreed, that rental stress should be reviewed and then addressed, and with the important addition of a date by which it will be done, I am supportive. And I'd also like to reaffirm the principle that policy should be preceded by a review, and that is also a principle worth supporting. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on the proposition? Deputy Stevenson.
Thank you, sir. And I also rise to speak in favour of the proposition. And I was, until the very last minute, going to vote in favour of the amendment as well. But the Minister then said that he would be bringing a report to the Assembly rather than a proposition. And that made me rethink that. And I'll come back to that point shortly. So in my manifesto at the last election, I did say that I believed we should reconsider how we link social housing rents to the increasingly unaffordable private sector market. And I stand by that today, and I will, as I say, be supporting this proposition. I would probably have supported the proposition unamended, actually, as well. But I want to just go back to a comment I made in the debate about the amendment, where I hopefully it was taken as a joke, but where I talked about the word review and the use of it, and we have seen this government initially did seek to rebrand reviews, and I think that was quite right, because reviews had become kind of associated with inaction and not doing anything. But I think in the eyes of the public, when the public see this assembly or ministers or government talking about reviewing something, there is quite rightly, I think, an expectation that something, or perhaps maybe not an expectation, but a hope, perhaps, that something will happen, that things may get better, that there will be some kind of action from that review. And we shouldn't forget that time and resources and energy all go into those reviews as well. So I think it's probably quite a right expectation that the public see a review and then have a hope associated with that something might change. In an ideal world, I'd like to see this housing minister and this council of ministers make some kind of commitment that there would be some action following this review. But I think perhaps we may be out of time on that, as the timescales put it. What this review will do is set up very nicely a very perfect election platform for anybody who chooses to take it, with the research, the data, and so on. I think that's the reality of where we are now and going forward. And, you know, maybe there will be those who choose to take that opportunity to make some kind of commitments and say, on the basis of this research, and I think this should happen, and if you elect me or us, this is what we will do. But the reality is that we won't, any of us here today or the next assembly, be actually helping those who are experiencing rental stress for quite a few years yet, and that's with a good wind as well. And that's really the reality of where we are. So what I would say, just to return to the review side of things and what will happen if this is approved shortly, I would request that the review does look very closely and really does interrogate the evidence and the data and the projections around cost and impacts to really come up with something that is robust and represents the opportunity for meaningful change. That's why I did ask in the debate on the amendment if the housing minister would be bringing forward the current system alongside any new options to enable it to be compared to, because there's no use just changing things for changing's sake. And I think there is sometimes, whether it's the reality or it's a perception, there's sometimes a feeling that around election time, we need things to say we want to change them, because that makes good lines in manifestos, and that makes good things to go out and talk to people about. But we shouldn't change things just for change's sake. So let's try and get some really good, robust data, evidence, really challenge it, interrogate it, compare it to what we have now, so that actually we can have a meaningful review that then action can actually follow from. And then I remain hopeful that from something like that piece of work, we can have that meaningful action which will make a difference to people's lives here in Jersey, maybe not today, but in a few years to come and into the future as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this proposition? Deputy Moore.
Thank you, sir. Action. No more reviews. I think those were the words that we heard last January, weren't they? And what has it taken? It's taken nearly 14 months to come back to this assembly and say, please, sir, can we have a review? It's absolute hypocrisy. I'm afraid there's no other way of explaining it. We were told that the current housing minister was going to call a housing crisis in line with his manifesto, and I'm afraid the left wing are not the only people who consider housing a crisis and a priority in their manifestos. It is a matter that concerns many of us, but there are other ways of looking at it and approaching the answers. Deputy Joseph talked earlier about supply. I'm a supply-side politician. Yes, absolutely. I believe that is the way that we approach the issues of housing and how we resolve the funding issues that are within our housing system. And so, sir, I cannot possibly support this proposition because it is not doing what we were promised by this government in January of last year. It is not bringing forward action. It is simply bringing a report, another report to sit on the shelf. Brilliant. Well, that's exactly what the people did not want to see. That is not what we were promised in January of last year. All that has been achieved in the past 14 months has been delay, and finally, let's get back and finish those reviews that were underway. just beggars belief, I'm afraid, sir, and I'm sorry to voice these thoughts in this assembly. I generally keep my counsel to myself, but I'm afraid after hearing what I've heard today, it has to be said, and so there be it.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak? Deputy Filth.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm sorry to follow the previous speaker. I had actually wanted to respond to Deputy Stevenson's rather more positive speech. I wanted to, Deputy Stevenson is on the scrutiny panel that I work with, that is ably chaired by Deputy Dublé. And I would hope that they know and they feel assured that as Minister for Social Security, I've always taken the opportunity to take action and not wait for lengthy reviews to be completed. So I did want to take the opportunity now to give my word that as Social Security Minister, that in the time that we are undertaking the work that we will be doing as a result of this proposition, if I see quick wins and things that can be changed, that aren't wholesale changes but can make a real difference to people's lives, and that comes out of this work, I will seek to make those changes as quickly as possible. And I wanted to give Deputy Stevenson my assurance on that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this proposition? Yes, Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. Just as it feels like we might be getting to the end of this debate, so I thought I'd just contribute some final words towards it. Don't take anything for granted, but it feels like hopefully a majority of members will be in support of us going away and doing this work. And I look forward to seeing what it leads to. I mentioned, of course, that it was my intention to produce a report that outlined what potential options for a revised system would look like and what that might involve, how deep potential changes might be or otherwise, and what potential implications there would be. And that could be an informative exercise. I think Deputy Stevenson, I think was right to bring up the prospect of that then going on and perhaps being a consideration for future election platforms. I personally hope that that is the case, because if an election manifesto policy has come about as a result of looking at a comprehensive review that's done on something, then you can bet that that policy is more likely to be credible, because the person adopting it will know what the implications are, they'll know what the funding is, etc. It won't just be a case of making a populist statement without having done any real thinking underpinning it. Which I think nicely brings me back to the previous election platform, because Deputy Moore, of course, is right that there have been many of us in this Assembly agitating for more action and less reviews and consultation. So I'm pleased now that I'm in a position where there is a lodged residential tenancy law amendment on the table, action which, if adopted by the Assembly, will make meaningful change to improve the lives of people who rent their homes in Jersey, and I look forward to the support from all of those members who've made reference to that before. But if members were interested enough to go back and look at our previous election manifesto in 2022, which had a housing crisis action plan in it, which outlined very clear action points, which our record is abundantly clear we are pursuing. And I was very grateful to Deputy War for pointing out P31 2021, which highlights just how consistent I have been on all of these subjects in recent years. But so, in fact, in that last manifesto, the line that referred to social housing rents actually said that we would review social housing rents. It's one of the few areas where we held our hands up to say, you know, we have an idea of what the answers are quite clearly for all of these issues, but on this specific subject, on social housing rents reform, we're actually not in a position yet to tell you exactly what the solution looks like. It's something we think would need to be reviewed before we can get to a position where we know what the solutions are. So this proposition is absolutely in line with that election manifesto and the promise that was made, and so there can, I think, be no accusation of hypocrisy against us on that front, sir, because we are to the letter doing what we said on this. So there have been members who have attempted to repeat what I think is a misnomer, that this is otherwise business as usual, when I think I comprehensively dealt with that in the debate in the previous debate on the amendment to this, to make clear why that's not strictly the case. But to reiterate, because again members have continued down this line, the reason that this review is now possible and can happen is because of the realignment I took to the housing agenda when I took over, to make sure that there would be capacity to do this. Had I not done those things, there would not have been capacity to be able to do these things. And I believe had the previous government continued in office, I think there wasn't the faintest chance that a review of social housing rents would have taken place, because of all of the weird and wonderful different roads to nowhere that were already set on that point. Empty homes, of course, being one, sir, and since Deputy Renouf has mentioned it, I can point out that the previous government had £500,000 to spend on an empty homes project. They spent 10% of it, gave the other 90% back just in time for me to take office. They gave it back as an underspend, but had already committed to unfunded spending in managing the glorified spreadsheet that was the empty homes service. So that, we can very clearly identify why there hasn't been action on that. But so we will, if this amended proposition is adopted, get to a position where the Assembly can be much clearer about what those options are. That will be presented in a report. If members felt that it was helpful to not simply have a report that's produced and sat on a shelf and doesn't go anywhere, but if members felt that actually it would be a good opportunity for an in-committee debate on that report to test what people's initial responses to it are and what other issues they'd want to be considered, I'd be more than happy to do that. That could potentially be a really good opportunity to test some of these things. So we can watch this space on that. That could be a really positive thing to do there. But otherwise, I hope members will get behind this amended proposition, see where it goes, and send a message out to people in Jersey who are concerned about rental stress, that the Assembly, for once, after years of rejecting proposition after proposition that have been brought in this vein, will put their names to something that will signify something positive to those people.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this proposition? I call upon Deputy Kovach to reply. Deputy Kovach.
Thank you, sir. Can I continue sitting?
Yes, of course, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, my pain calmed down a bit, but from the painkillers I'm a bit drowsy, so might be a more cheerful side. But the matter I want to address is serious, and I want to thank everyone that contributed to this debate and to the amendment. Debate was wide and varied, and I actually welcome the debate. I always welcome different views, as long as are targeted to the proposition and not to the person. And different views are always bringing different perspective that maybe we didn't think of. Worries that have been brought, hopefully they've been addressed. But now is to look how we can generally do something, to start to do something for, in the sense of helping the ones that struggle. And as we close this debate, I want to bring us back to the heart of the matter, the people behind the numbers. We've talked about statistics, and they are stark. Over half of our social housing tenants are saying their rent is too high, even with financial support. Households on the lowest incomes are spending over half their income just to keep a roof over their heads, and these aren't just figures, they're lives. They're single parent choosing between rent and food, the pensioners switching off the heating so they can afford to pay the landlord, the family trapped in a system that's meant to support them, but instead is adding to the stress. We are not here today to fix everything overnight. What this proposition does is ask for a shift in how we think, a shift towards fairness, sustainability, and dignity. I've heard the concerns about the process, and that's why I accepted the Minister's amendment. It ensures that the work ahead will be done properly through consultation, modeling, engagement with tenants and housing providers, all grounded in evidence. To respond to Deputy Alex Curtis' definition of rental stress, I repeat, I didn't want to put the exact definition of how it should be in the proposition. But to me, is in the sense of no one having to choose between rent and food, rent or healthcare, and that's how I see rental stress. Obviously, the definition can be reviewed in the sense to show the reality of lived experiences. But this work needs a foundation. And that foundation is this principle, that social rents should not cause rental stress. That's not radical, it's common sense, it's compassion. Because we can't keep relying just on benefits to do all the heavy lifting. Benefits might help people survive, but they won't help them thrive. We need to deal with the real issue, the underlying cost of rent itself. Affordability could come through different means, different routes, and that's what accepting this principle would lead to reviewing. I know some will say, but what about investment in housing? What about financial viability? Of course that matters, but affordability isn't the enemy of development. We can find the balance, and that's exactly what the upcoming review is meant to explore. And if the electorate will want me back in the Assembly next term, I will for sure push for the best viable plans brought to be also implemented. Sir, this is not about ideology, it's about people. People who deserve not just a roof over their heads, but security, stability, and the life of dignity. The proposition we're voting on today is fair, realistic, and overdue. It doesn't demand instant solutions, but it does demand that we finally face the problem head on and stop designing systems that quietly accept an affordable rent as normal. If we want to say that housing is a priority, really say it, then this is how we show it. Let's take this first step. Let's show tenants they've been heard, that we recognize housing isn't just a market, it's a human need, and assess best options, where we can then contribute to the details within an in-committee debate, which the Minister has confirmed, so we can all have a say on those plans. I ask the Assembly to support this proposition in principle, to allow the Minister to assess feasible options and bring such plans back by January 2026, so the next Assembly is equipped with the evidence and recommendations it needs to tackle this affordability issue effectively. This is how we help build a future where no one in Jersey has to choose between paying rent and feeding their family. I maintain the proposal as amended, and I call for the bill.
The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting on the proposition as amended. If all members, including those attending remotely, have had the chance to cast their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. Thank you. I ask that the proposition has been adopted at 34 votes for, 4 votes contra, and 2 abstentions. Yes.
Those voting contra, the Conotabo St Rallard, and Deputies Ayer, Moore and Barbara Ward, and the abstentions, Deputy Andrews, and online the Conotabo of St Clement.
Next item is the review of the impact of increases to the minimum wage on the recruitment and retention of trainees lodged by Deputy Andrews. The main respondent is the Minister for Social Security. I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The states are asked to decide whether they're of opinion to request the Minister for Social Security to refer to the Jersey Employment Forum for review the impact of any increases to the minimum wage from 2024 onwards on the recruitment and retention of trainees and to present the forum's report to the Assembly no later than September 2027.
Deputy Andrews.
Thank you, sir. Originally, it was myself who brought forward a proposition to amalgamate the then trainee minimum wage rates into the minimum wage. Back then, the minimum wage was set at £9.50. And of course, we have seen a new iteration of the Council of Ministers being formed. And, you know, I do support the moves that they have taken to increase the baseline wage to support those who are low-income earners. I think it's only right that we are doing that, and people need to see that they can have more disposable income, but they can also increase their ability to save as well. But of course, there are always going to be implications when you are increasing the baseline wage, and that impact could potentially be seen within the economy in terms of when we're looking at domestic inflation, and that's something that, say, Deputy Joseph has mentioned a couple of times in this sitting already, and also in a few previous sittings as well. And it's something that has been mentioned to me, especially in the building trade. There's been a few cases where the trainees who were, for instance, on a rate of, say, £7.87 or £9.19, and now they are on a rate of, say, £13, but they're people who were supporting them, say, 3 years ago, were maybe on a rate of, say, £10.50, so their wages have also increased. And so it's been a cascade all the way through the building trade because of the wage increases, and that has obviously led to higher costs as well for those who are utilising the services of those in the building trade. Now, I know that the Minister has touched upon that it's in law that in 2027 she is to review the rates. However, having spoken to a number of different individuals, I think efforts ought to be made to speak to as many individuals as we can in different organisations when the Jersey Employment Forum can engage those individuals from April of next year, because there are implications for some of Jersey's young people in particular, some of whom have really struggled to find a job. And also some of the students up at Highlands, they've started a course, and then when they go to interviews, it's soon decided upon that they are not going to be recruited, and so they don't really know what to do. Young people should feel that they can aspire, they can follow a career path that they want to do very well in, but that entry into the labour market at the moment is proving to be potentially prohibitive. And so I think there has to be work that is done to ensure, yes, let's ensure that people are supported. Let's ensure that young people feel appreciated, and young people can be supported when they enter the labour market. And that might be the case that we need to support firms as well who take on trainees. Obviously, we've got the Skills Development Fund, but that funding at the moment is limited, and we might need to increase the funding for those individuals. Now, at the time when I lodged my proposition, and it was actually the Jersey Employment Forum who recommended that such trainee rates should be amalgamated into the minimum wage rate, at the time there was only less than 100 individuals on the trainee minimum wage rates. However, since then, it's been quite clear that the baseline wage will become the living wage. And so what that means is, in quite a small period of time, the wage hikes are going to be fairly considerable. So, for instance, if you're looking at a trainee on year one, they were on about £16,000. Now they're on about £27,000. So, as you can probably imagine, if you are a small business, maybe an electrician or a plumber, you've maybe got 3 or 4 people working for you, and the tradition is you employ a trainee every single year. But for year one trainees, it tends to be the case that they are there to learn, and so you can't really rely upon them to deliver a service as such until maybe year 2. Definitely year 3, they would be in a really good position where they could be providing a service, and they could be independently providing that service for a firm. So there are, of course, higher input costs for employers, and I think it's absolutely paramount that we look at this in a different way compared to some of the other jurisdictions who quite simply have no sub-minimum wage rates for trainees because they have a minimum wage rate. But with us, because we've got a higher rate, that being the living wage, that we need to potentially be open to reintroducing the trainee minimum wage rates depending on what the consultation brings up. We also need to look at the evidence in that respect, because there might be an increase in demand for trainees since the baseline wage has gone up. And so I think we just need to ensure that we are engaging with those stakeholders who want to be part of the consultation that the Jersey Employment Forum will commence with. Now, sir, when I was looking at some of the minimum wage rates in Europe, it was quite interesting information. There were about 6 states with a minimum wage rate of about €1,500 per month. When we're looking at Jersey at the moment, I think the living wage rate is about 29,000, and it potentially could go up again next year. So we are definitely going to be in a position where we are setting a baseline wage that is probably one of the more costly rates across some of the European states in Europe that the data is made available. So of course that is going to have some implications for young people when, for instance, they were on 16 and 19,000, and then say 3 years later they could be on something that is maybe in excess of £30,000. So I just think that is something that we need to be cognizant of. And having spoken to the vice chair of the Construction Council, there was one thing that they highlighted to me. Last time when there's a consultation that took place, it wasn't quite clear to them that it was also involving the trainee minimum wage rate. So when they were broached, they didn't really consider the impact on the trainee minimum wage rates. And so I just think it has to be made very explicit in the detail and the literature that's made available that there is the trainee minimum wage rates, the minimum wage rate, and the living wage, just so it's more conspicuous for some people. Otherwise, we potentially could be missing out on gathering certain evidence that some people feel that they may want to contribute to. So I'll leave it there, sir. So thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the proposition seconded? Yes. Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Brenneth, then Deputy Felton. Deputy Brenneth.
So I'm going to speak against this proposition on the basic principle, which is we should not accept propositions that attempt to make something happen that is already mandated in statute. The Social Security Minister has made clear that this is something she is required to do anyway. She was not intending to break her obligations under statute, and in fact was committed to doing it. So I think that on principle, this Assembly should not be spending its time debating propositions that are changing nothing, gains nothing, and I think that should be discouraged, and we should therefore not support it. I must say I am tempted to bring a proposition requesting the Education Minister to review the provision of school places, Article 7 of the Education Law, or bring a proposition requesting the Treasury Minister to bring forward a comprehensive plan for the government's spending plans and its revenue-raising measures, and to do so by the end of the year, and to call it a budget. I think that this is a spurious proposition and that we should reject it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, sir. It is difficult to know how to respond to this proposition. As Deputy Brenneth has made clear, this is something that the future Social Security Minister, I'm minded it will be the future Assembly that this work will happen within. The future Social Security Minister is legislated to do anyway, so legislation would have to change if this work was not to be done. I just wanted to give the background as to why in my comments paper I urged members to support the proposition if it came to a vote, and that was just for me around consistency, because my recollection is that I think there was an amendment brought fairly recently, I think it was by Deputy Jean, around some work that the Environment Minister was already doing, and we supported that amendment even though that work was already being done. So I think it is important to treat all members the same and to act with consistency in relation to those matters. I think also we need to consider what situation I or any other future Social Security Minister would be in if the proposition was rejected. Would that then mean that I would need then to enact what the Assembly has rejected in rejecting the proposition, and therefore then bring changes to the legislation to tell the next minister not to do this piece of work. So I do think this proposition puts us in a fairly tricky situation. I completely understand why Deputy Reniff has come to the position that he has come to, but I would urge members to consider what position we'd be in if the proposition itself would be rejected. In saying that, I also would urge members to speak to ministers before bringing propositions. I think it's really important that the time that we spend in this chamber is time well spent and time making actual differences to the lives of our community. Just to answer back some of the concerns that Deputy Andrews raised in his initial speech. Yes, the minimum wage has risen further and faster than it would have done under the previous government. I'm incredibly proud of that achievement. But we've also put in place the Better Business Support Package, which does include grants of £2,000 towards traineeships. So there is support there for people who are taking on trainees. I also want to give the Assembly comfort that I wouldn't wait until the time outlined within this proposition before looking at issues related to wages and pay and traineeships and the impact. I consistently have conversations with both the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning and the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, and also industry representatives about these very issues. I don't think we should be waiting until the specified time period to be having those conversations. It needs to be an ongoing conversation. My team also consistently work with the team at Skills Jersey as well, and I know that Skills Jersey are doing a lot of work in monitoring traineeships and apprenticeships, and they of course will provide advice to the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning. So this is a work in progress. All ministers are committed to ensuring that apprenticeships and traineeships continue to be available and that our businesses are supported to deliver them. But we're also committed to working towards a living wage for all islanders. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. There was a third light on. I didn't get it. Was it you, Deputy Curtis?
Yes, sir.
Deputy Curtis, then Nicola Thomas and Brillard. Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, and sorry, members, to the members for speaking so much today. Very quickly, I would like to echo and concur with Deputy Reniff in why I won't support this proposition today. I note the comments made by the Minister for Social Security about consistency, but I believe that there is a difference between all these propositions. Personally, I believe what Deputy Jeune brought was pushing forward a piece of work that I think was at risk from not just the narrative that the Minister had shared and his priorities was not being done, and reprioritised this. And actually, narrowly so, I supported the amended proposition just voted on prior, because the Minister assured us he was not doing this work already. So much as that disappointed me, he was proposing new work that he hadn't been doing. And so I could come to the conclusion that I would reluctantly support that. This is work that is being done. I am being consistent in the vote on reduction of Cabinet Office finances last year. I abstained. I should have voted against on that one, was my plan, because that was work the Chief Minister had said was in train, was being done. And so for my consistency, sir, propositions should be for new work. They shouldn't be reiterating work already to be undertaken either by statute, legislation, or by something as foundational as a CSP or a budget. And I would ask, given we are having this debate, for the proposer in his summing up to explain what conversations he did have with the Social Security Minister, and if he did not have them, why not? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Conor Thomas and Brillard.
Thank you, sir. I rise really to reinforce my previous comments where I suggest that government shouldn't have any involvement in employee wages
and the minimum wage particularly. Not that I'm against those being paid a minimum wage, but I think the consequences are often overlooked, and this is where the Deputy's proposal comes in. What are the consequences of a prescribed minimum wage? They will, in fact, drive employers away from employing people. They will push more people onto 0 hours contracts, as quite frankly, a lot of the smaller businesses just won't be able to afford what the government are being proposing, nice as though it may be for the employees. So I think in her deliberations, sir, the Minister needs to consider what those consequences might be. Are they going to be creating more jobs? Are they going to be reducing jobs? And that, I think, is what the Deputy is asking in his proposition at the moment. I think it's often overlooked, sir, that if a trainee or an apprentice is taken on by a business, the tradesman or tradesperson involved would probably be losing half their chargeable time because of it. That is often overlooked, sir, and I can only speak with experience of running a business myself, that is certainly the case. And sadly, government, as I alluded to earlier on, government interference will do nothing to help the employment of young people. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Colin. Does anyone else wish to speak on this proposition? Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. Just very briefly, I share the same concerns as Deputy Andrews about apprenticeship placements particularly. However, I don't want to vote for a proposition that's about something that's already happening, so therefore I will abstain.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Taddeo.
Thank you, sir. Just following on from the Constable of St Brillards, I wasn't quite clear if he was saying he doesn't think there should be a minimum wage at all, because if he's saying that, and that's good, it's refreshing to hear somebody say that. I've not heard that for quite a while, but that's a point of view. Just let the free market decide. But I think that's quite far removed from the mainstream view. Even looking at Senator Deputy Gorst, doesn't seem to be giving anything away in that regard. So, as the sir, I'm not clear here what the idea or the problem is that Deputy Andrews has in moving this. So, it seems to me that ultimately that there are, if we go behind the philosophy of the trainee apprenticeships and how trainees are paid, it seems to me that there are two possible ways forward. We either agree that everybody who works should be on a minimum wage, and that if there are, let's call them subsidies or packages that employees can apply for help with in supporting them to, of course, provide that training, presuming that training isn't simply beneficial for their companies, and that, of course, the trainee, once they've done their apprenticeship, may not stay with the employer that's given them the training, then it seems to me that there needs to be some kind of partnership with government. And then the question is that partnership with government done through the Economic Development Department? Is it done through the Social Security system? Is it done through the education system? Or is there perhaps a package of all three which somehow contributes to reimbursing the employer for the real and perhaps notional costs that they have? And I think it's, for me, it's that latter part which is more important. I would prefer to see a system where everybody, whether they're apprentice or not, gets paid a minimum wage which will be increasingly the living wage, because that person still needs to live, right? So it doesn't matter if you're an apprentice, and you could, of course, be an apprentice, a trainee, when you're 16 or when you're 30 or when you're 45. That doesn't really matter, because we can all need to retrain and learn the ropes of a new profession. And so it would seem that perhaps you can't simply go to your landlord or to the supermarket and say, look, can I get a trainee rate for my rent, please? Can I get a trainee rate for my loaf of bread and for my shopping this week? That doesn't wash. So I think probably I'd like to hear from maybe the mover of this, whether he disagrees with actually the principle that trainees at the moment are being paid the same as the minimum wage, although there is a provision in the law which would allow the minister to vary the trainee rate so that it's decoupled from the, so it's not the same as the minimum wage. It doesn't have to be, it just coincidentally is at the moment. And if that's what the mover of the proposition is suggesting, then I'd appreciate from a political point of view if you could maybe articulate that a little bit more. I think that the Minister has been a little bit kind in the sense that her comments didn't urge us to vote for this proposition. The comments, I think, suggested that we could vote for this proposition if we wanted to. But I'm also mindful of what Deputy Renouf has said about simply doing things which are already being done. So I'd be grateful for the mover of the proposition in his summing up to perhaps give more meat to the bones of what he thinks the problem is, what he thinks the potential solution is that the body needs to look at in reporting back to the Minister, the Employment Forum needs to look at in this, and whether there ultimately needs to be a change of policy or not.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Balash.
So one of the great privileges that we have in this Assembly is that any member can bring a proposition to the States and can know that it will and must be debated. That's quite different from the position in other parliaments. Certainly if one looks at the House of Commons, a backbencher can lodge a proposition, lodge a motion, but the chances of it being debated are pretty slim. So we have this very great privilege. And like all privileges, it seems to me that a privilege should not be abused. And I'm sorry to say this to Deputy Andrews, but I think this is an abuse of the privilege. It really doesn't matter one way or another whether this proposition is passed. What it seeks to achieve is going to happen whatever we do. And this is not a constructive or positive way for the Assembly to spend its time. I think Deputy Renouf is entirely correct, and I think that the Minister is wrong. I think this proposition should be rejected in order to make it perfectly clear to any member that a proposition should be only brought when it seeks to achieve something which is not otherwise going to be achieved.
Thank you, Deputy. Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. The phrase, you just can't win, comes to mind here. I mean, I refer, let's just look back at the proposition of Deputy Jeune on the energy strategy. That's something we were doing. I was Minister not there, but we accepted that. And the Deputy saying we weren't. And this is it. If we say we're doing it, members say, oh, but you won't, so we're going to bring a proposition. There is just no continuity here. Actually, there was a genuine attempt around the Council of Ministers table to say, the Deputy's lodged a proposition, let's try and accept it. We could reject it. We don't want to be seen to be pushing back on everything with Assembly members. And so that's what we decided to do. There's no continuity. I accept Deputy Renouf's comments, as I do strongly support, as Deputy Balash says, the rights of members to bring proposition, the rights of members to speak as they see fit. But I think actually this could end up being, and I make no criticism of Deputy Andrews, but I would urge members thinking of bringing propositions to please speak to the relevant ministers first to see if they can be reassured. Some do, some don't. Be reassured that the government is already carrying something out. And if they are reassured, there's no need for them to bring a proposition. They can work with the minister. If they're not reassured that it's going to happen, then they can bring a proposition to get the support of the Assembly to help see it through, to help keep it on a track. But I think this could be quite helpful because we're getting a steer from the Assembly. And I know there's an election coming up, and I was hoping that this Assembly and members would not already be focusing on that and actually stop thinking about their own chances of perhaps re-election and letting that guide what comes before this Assembly in terms of questions and proposition, but continue to focus on what is right for this island. And I fear that we are going to, conversations like this will mean we become distracted from what our duty is to work always in the best interests of islanders. But I think we're going to get a steer today, sir, that actually, if there's something we're already doing, we shouldn't support any amendments to do that. Now, I know that's going to probably upset a number of members, but really the inconsistency in some of the comments today is quite surprising. The proposition itself, I think, is fairly straightforward. I don't disagree with Senator Balash. I'm not sure it was necessary, whilst I'm not going to speak out against any member who wants to bring any proposition. It is quite clear that under Article 18 of the Employment Law, the next Minister for Social Security will be required to carry out a review, and a review is important. Okay, now, there are things, from the start of this government, we've tried to limit the amount of reports and reviews because there were just too many, but some need to be done. A review into costs of rent and rental affordability and rental stress in Andium homes, I think, is an important one. I think reviewing the impact of this from the new minimum wage is very important. Lots of other reviews, I think, lots of other careful consideration of the impact of the move to the living wage, including, at the risk of getting myself in trouble, the rates for younger people aged 16 to 18 and the impact that might have on holiday and seasonal work. Now, I know that's a debate we've had at Council of Ministers, and the Council of Ministers supported the current position. But it's important moving forward when we introduce new policies that do have impacts on businesses and the economy, sir, we are prepared to look at those decisions on a regular basis to make sure they are working. So I would ask members to support the proposition of Deputy Ed Andrews, because it's a work in progress and we're doing it. And then I would ask members to just think a bit more carefully before bringing propositions that are already being done, because I hear the mood of the Assembly and they don't want to waste time on debate like this if we're doing the work already, sir, although I'm not holding my breath. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Minister. Deputy Chairman.
Thank you, sir. And I'm glad to follow the Chief Minister, because I was pretty disappointed in what the Chief Minister had to say. I think he's conflating several issues, and he used my proposition as one that it's in the same line as this one. And I'd like to remind the Chief Minister that it's the statutory responsibility of the Jersey Employment Forum, and I have it here, under the Employment Law for 2003, that they have to advise the Minister on the minimum wage, so they have to conduct an annual review and consultation on the minimum wage. So it's a statutory responsibility already in law, and this is very different from the proposition that I brought, which is a policy issue, which if the Chief Minister is taking the same line, I just maybe point out that the carbon neutral roadmap that had an energy strategy deadline within it was not put in the common strategic priorities of this current Council of Ministers, and the scrutiny panel had to put in an amendment to make sure it was in there. So if that hadn't happened, there wouldn't be any energy strategy on the table whatsoever. But if we're taking that point, what about all the policies that are currently in the Bridging Island Plan? None of them are going to be done by the end of this year. We've had a very clear steer from the Minister that is impossible to do before the end of this year. So there's clear priorities being taken. And so to say that because that is written down in a policy document, that therefore it all should have happened already, and why would any member bring a proposition to reiterate that? Well, that's because we keep having priorities being pushed all the time, and we have deadlines being pushed all the time, and that's why we don't have a Bridging Island Plan that has all the policies in place and many other policy areas that we are not getting from this current Council of Ministers, because of all the situations we've had to deal with in the last few years. And so deadlines are continuously missed, and that is why it is important for this Assembly to bring propositions to say, no, we want to have very clear deadlines being put on the table and agreeing to make sure that ministers are held to account with policies. That is very different when you're talking about a law that is already in place and there's statutory responsibility already done for this body called the Jersey Employment Forum to do and advise the Minister for a minimum wage, which is exactly what the proposer is saying, to request the Minister of Social Security to refer the Jersey Employment Forum to review the impact of any increase into the minimum wage. When I look at the law, the employment law of 2003, it basically says the Jersey Employment Forum has to advise the minister to conduct annual reviews and consultations on the minimum wage. Not whatever the minimum wage was in the past, annually. So whatever the minimum wage is currently, which of course is changing with the Council of Ministers currently, it is changing. We're going to be calling it a living wage. It still won't mean that the Jersey Employment Forum is now not having to do this annual review. They will be having to do this annual review because it's still written in the law. And unless the proposer is advising us to change the wording in the law and doing an amendment like that, this is what the discussion is that we're having now, and why it is different. And I would like to urge members to not heed what the Chief Minister said and be scared off from bringing propositions that pushes this current Council of Ministers to carry on to deliver policies that we've all voted on or past assemblies have voted on, and they're still not here. They're still not here. We still don't have them on the table. We've got apparently loads are coming before the end of the year. But this has already been agreed in 2003 by the States Assembly at that time. And therefore, why would we, this is the discussion that we're having here. And so to conflate the two issues is quite frankly ridiculous. And I really would hope that the Assembly is not scared off from bringing propositions in the future. But again, taking on what Deputy Reniff has said and Deputy Balash, this is wasting our time because it's already in law that this has to happen. It's not policy and development. It's not ministers being able to push it down the line. And that's why we're coming here to say it has to happen. It has to happen already. And if it doesn't happen, they're in breach of their responsibilities. And this is the discussion we're having. So I'm not really understanding why those who are saying, yes, we should bring it, I refer them back to Deputy Reniff and saying the rest of this year, then we can bring propositions for all sorts of statutory things that are on the books already, and we can call that work done and well done, tick, 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 for the elections in the future. And I also think that that is not what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be moving forward and trying to use this assembly and use our time here in debate to move issues that islanders have currently to be able to support them. And to do something that's already in law, for me, is quite frankly a waste of time. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Garner, do you want to clarify?
I would like to ask point of clarification, maybe to ask SG. I'm trying to remember, and maybe Assistant Minister can help.
Well,
Have the consultation with the Jersey Employment Forum has been suspended for 2 years to be able to reach the minimum, to reach the living wage before the elections? Can somebody advise if this correct status?
Well, you can only ask for advice from the Attorney Solicitor General, but you can't ask for a comment
from the Attorney General, if we suspended consultations, suspended this law till the end of this basically term.
That's not a legal question. It's not one I'm competent to answer.
I think, do you want to make... You can only ask for advice from the solicitor, or you can ask the last speaker to clarify something, but you can't ask a general question unless you're making a speech, Deputy Gardner. But you might want to come to speak in due course. Yes, you want to speak in due course, do you?
I would like to ask the assistant, maybe, because Minister already...
You can make a speech in due course if you wish to, which you can ask questions to be dealt with later on. The next person to speak is Deputy Joseph. Deputy Joseph.
So I can understand why members are a bit concerned. I agree with Deputy Balash in his advancing of members being able to bring propositions. And we've got a confused answer from ministers. I'm agreeing with Deputy Jeune because I amended her carbon neutral roadmap in good faith. I thought it was an improvement. I was given assurances that there was going to be something happening, and it hasn't. And I'm still asking questions. So ministers can't have it both ways. But Deputy Balash is quite right. I understand that what Deputy Andrews is trying to do is got to be done anyway by the minister. It's a statutory obligation. And so I really don't know what members can do. If members reject this proposition, the minister is going to do it anyway, unless I've misunderstood, sir. Is that, and that's it's not a point of order, but I'm looking at you, sir, because all the presiding officer...
That's the understanding we all have, that it's automatic, and a proposition can't change the word of a statute.
So a member's proposition is effectively not going to negate, it's not going to vote against it, and I wonder whether or not on that basis, I'm looking at Deputy Andrews, I am very sympathetic to a backbencher, but I don't think we should waste this Assembly's time, and I wonder whether or not it's actually, if he's not going to withdraw the proposition, he's got an undertaking from the Minister to do it. If he's going to withdraw, I can give way to him.
You've got as a point of clarification, or for Deputy Joseph?
No, sir.
It's a matter of a response, then you must respond when you respond at the end of the
I was
debate.
just going to say is that in order not to waste the Assembly's time, whether or not we can move a proposition without notice under, I'm just trying to relevant the standing at 85 to move on to the next item, but I'll give way to Deputy Andrews if he wants to.
Sir, I do apologise. I was well intended, and I know that the Council of Ministers discussed the trainee minimum wage rates, and they decided against reintegrating the trainee minimum wage rate. So I felt compelled to ensure that there was some level of independence and oversight of the baseline wage increases. However, due to the confusion, I will withdraw the proposition, sir.
You'll need to leave the Assembly to do so. Is that seconded?
Yes, sir.
Are members content to allow the Deputy to withdraw his proposition without a debate, or does someone want to talk about it?
I was going to conclude my speech.
Sorry?
I was going to conclude my remarks.
Well, no, you don't need to, because the proposition's been withdrawn.
I'd just like clarification about what we do going forward with ministers giving undertakings.
Well, the law is as the law is. The proposition's been withdrawn. So we now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is Chief Minister poll, lodged by Deputy Moore. The main respondent is the Chair of the Privileges and Procedures Committee. I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The states are asked to decide whether they're of opinion, A, to agree in principle that the Chief Minister should be elected through an island-wide vote of registered voters, B, that prior to a general election, all prospective candidates intending to stand for the role of Chief Minister must declare their intention when they submit their nomination form as a senatorial candidate in the general election, C, that a poll of candidates shall be conducted in parallel with the general election to establish which the electorate prefers in the role of Chief Minister. D, that the results of the poll of candidates for Chief Minister shall be binding and that the successful candidate will become Chief Minister designate upon their taking the oath of office as a states member following the general election. And E, to request the Privileges and Procedures Committee to bring forward for approval the necessary legislative amendments to give effect to the above proposals for implementation before the 28th of February 2026.
Deputy Moore.
Thank you, sir. Well, if nothing less, this proposition has got people talking, not us in here, but those people outside who we represent, and of course our friends across the water in Guernsey. I would like to thank all of those who have engaged on the topic so far, whether or not they agree or disagree. Ultimately, this is a proposal, sir, aimed at increasing our voter engagement and improving transparency in our democratic system. This proposal was one of 36 recommendations brought by the Democratic Accountability and Governance Subcommittee of the Privileges and Procedures Committee of 2022. In her foreword, then Senator Valois stated, This matter will be open to a future Privileges and Procedures Committee to ignite this discussion at the beginning of a term of office. I would encourage a future committee to do so." End quote. The DAG report, as it was known, is rich with insight, sir. I recommend to all members, if they haven't done so, to read it and remind themselves of the points that it makes. Or, for those who are relatively new to the Assembly, there's also a useful background to the development of ministerial government and some of the debates that have been held since that time. While some of the recommendations, such as the improvements to the role of Deputy Chief Minister, have been achieved, the vast majority of the 36 recommendations have not. It would be helpful, sir, to hear from the PPC during this debate and to understand why they have barely taken forward any of those recommendations that were brought forward by this well-considered report. Naturally, I was disappointed by the comments that were published by the PPC, particularly as they made no mention of their predecessor committee's own report, which had provided them with a plan for early action during this term of office. Indeed, in my former role, I was often put in an uncomfortable position of questions from the then chair of the Corporate Services Committee, who took an interest in one aspect of the DAG report that he had been a member of, and regularly asked about the role of a cabinet secretary, which of course at the time when we had a permanent role holder in the job of chief executive was a rather uncomfortable place to be, because I could not give perhaps the answer that I wanted to give to those questions, but it seemingly did not matter to them that we had a permanent role holder and that there might be some issues if the issue was addressed during their time in their role. So let's continue. Sir, as I said earlier, this proposition has probably sparked more debate in Guernsey than it has here. Of course, they are a bit closer to an election than we are. But a directly elected head of government is not an entirely new concept. Sir Mark Bowyer kindly did some research and wrote in the JEP, "It is worth noting that the position in 3 territories that are classified as unincorporated organised territories of the US with local self-government, similar to Jersey's relationship with the UK, Guam, Puerto Rico, and American Samoa, all have direct election of a chief minister who is head of the government but not head of state." End quote. And in the British Virgin Islands, in 2022, a commission proposed a directly elected premier as part of the improvements it set out for the democratic system there. Whilst it could be said that running an open and direct election for a chief minister may be presidential in style, this proposition does not seek to change the role of chief minister, which would remain that of our head of government. When electing a chief minister, islanders are electing a head of government, not a head of state. We have a head of state, our monarch, who is represented in the island by the lieutenant governor. It also deals with our political system, where most of us stand as independent candidates. So the public have no idea who their candidates might vote for when it comes to the key role that will set the direction of the next government. The vision statement of the Chief Minister candidates would be published for the election campaign, not after the election results, when there is little time for them to be scrutinised, with candidates challenged on their plan for delivering on that vision. This will offer the public an opportunity to focus on policy and the direction of the next government that it might take, not just personalities. Some will say that the public don't know us as we here do know each other. But what's of the new members who arrive in the Assembly, perhaps only knowing a handful of people, and are expected to take that decision? Are they genuinely better able to take that decision than any member of the public? And it's anticipated that some will argue that people who can win the popularity contest of a senatorial election aren't necessarily the best leaders. I say to them, the public are perfectly capable of understanding a different question when the question is posed to them, and I, for one, have faith that they will make the right decision. As one experienced political commentator told me recently, they don't recall the name of the person that they voted for in the UK general election last year. All they knew was that they were voting for the person that would mean Sir Keir Starmer would be elected Prime Minister. In the absence of a strong party system here, surely we should offer our electorate the opportunity to express a view as to who they want to lead them and to have an opportunity to choose in an open and transparent fashion. So I make the proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the proposition seconded? Yes. Who wishes to speak on the proposition? If no member wishes to speak, Deputy Balash.
Sir, I'm sorry that today I seem to be cast in the role of a grumpy backbencher who is opposing everything that comes before the Assembly. But while I sympathise with some of the sentiments which have been articulated by Deputy Moore, I must say that her proposition is, in my view, entirely unworkable. There is a fundamental distinction, as the Deputy knows, between a presidential system and a ministerial system. They are quite different. France and America have presidential systems. We, like the United Kingdom, have a ministerial system. I want to draw attention to two parts of the Deputy's report. The first one is on page 3, where she states a poll for Chief Minister will pose a specific question to the electorate. It will ask them to consider who they think has the qualities and vision that they would like to see lead the island. And it is true, but only partly true, that the Chief Minister is the political leader of the island. It's true only up to a point, because the Chief Minister is, in the Latin phrase, primus inter pares, the first among equals. The Chief Minister does not have the power to dictate what happens around the table of the Council of Ministers. Each minister has his own voice or her own voice and can veto any proposal that is put forward by the Chief Minister. The Chief Minister can, in short, be outvoted. He can offer leadership, but that leadership may not be followed. In essence, he must enjoy the confidence of his fellow ministers, and more importantly, perhaps, enjoy the confidence of the Assembly. And that leads on to the second point, which is that what happens if the Chief Minister, elected by the public, does not enjoy the confidence of the Assembly? And the Deputy's answer to that is that in the event that a member brought a motion of no confidence in the Chief Minister, the Assembly would be required to ask the GREF to run a further public poll to elect a new Chief Minister. I can think of a number of objections to that, both in terms of time, what happens in the interim while a Chief Minister is known not to enjoy the confidence of the Assembly, but the process of re-electing or electing a successor has not yet been completed. But the important thing is that, as I said earlier, the Chief Minister must enjoy the confidence of the Assembly. So what happens if there is a further poll and the public chooses to elect the same person as the Chief Minister? What happens then? There will be a stalemate, a political paralysis. The public have spoken, they have elected a Chief Minister, but the Chief Minister can't work because the Chief Minister does not enjoy the confidence of the fellow members of the Assembly. We cannot allow ourselves to get into that position. This hybrid idea of a cross between a presidential system and a ministerial system might be attractive in some respects. But the short answer is that I'm afraid it does not work.
Thank you, Deputy. Conataba St Martin.
Thank you, sir. PPC considered Deputy Moore's proposition at our last meeting. We could not do so earlier as we didn't have engagement with the Deputy did not engage with the committee before lodging her proposition. As it is, PPC has presented comments on the proposition which I hope members have been able to read. The committee concluded that the proposition should be rejected, although Deputy Doublé, as a member of our PPC, has advised that she will make an independent decision on the proposition. We recognise that Deputy Moore is proposing a form of direct democracy, as has been already mentioned this afternoon, whereby islanders would choose a chief minister, and that such a situation may appear desirable. However, there are two principal reasons why we believe the Assembly should not adopt such a proposition at this time. Firstly, there are various issues that would need to be addressed if we were to move to the system proposed by the Deputy. The Deputy has identified some of them in her accompanying report. What would happen in the event of a vote of no confidence in the Chief Minister, for example? But the details remain to be explored, confirmed and addressed. There are also issues not mentioned by the Deputy, which we think would arise, and on which the Assembly would have given no direction to PPC on what to do. The Deputy has acknowledged comments from a previous PPC on this topic, in that her proposition would change our system from a parliamentary one and move it towards a presidential system. At the moment, our system is parliamentary in that it is the Assembly that chooses the government. There is no direct choice made by islanders. This Assembly is based on the fact that the government, the Chief Minister and ministers have to command sufficient support from the Assembly. This is akin to what happens in the UK, even though the state of party politics is different there. A Prime Minister for the UK is not directly chosen by the electorate, but is determined constitutionally on the basis of who can command sufficient support in Parliament. Having a directly elected Chief Minister would change that situation in Jersey. It is unclear what impact this would have on the selection of other members of the government, particularly ministers. The Deputy's proposition is silent on that point, but PPC anticipates it would need to be considered. Would a directly elected Chief Minister expect simply to appoint their own ministers? How would the political culture be affected by this merging of presidential and parliamentary systems? The merging of systems that would arise from adoption of the proposition is something that requires more thought. Our second reason for rejecting the proposition is the timing of it. PPC has previously advised the Assembly that changes to our electoral system should not be made within 1 year of the elections. Whilst the Assembly may have chosen to deviate from that advice with the reinstatement of senators, the recommendations and international guidance on this point remain the same and remain valid. If the Deputy's proposition were adopted, we would inevitably be making substantial changes to elections legislation, including changes we may not yet be conscious of, less than 1 year before the elections on the 7th of June 2026. This is not best practice and not advisable. A proposal of this kind needs more time and more opportunity for consideration than adoption of this proposition would allow, and therefore PPC recommends that the Assembly should reject this proposition. Thank you.
Deputy Mezig.
Thank you, sir. And I want to commend Deputy Moore for this proposition because in it she is getting at a very basic and fundamental point which we should not shy away from making, and that is that our electoral system is completely and utterly inadequate, and it does not provide for the people of the island to use that system for determining the future of their island. It is essentially a lottery, having a system where candidates standing have no obligation actually to indicate what their programme for government would be if they took part in government and who they would associate with to lead that government based on their vision and expertise. That, in my view, sir, is one of the key reasons why electoral turnout is so bad in Jersey, because people don't feel like their vote is particularly worth anything, and they're more than justified in thinking so, sir. And the glorified personality contests that elections often end up being don't contribute to assisting in that at all. And this Assembly, sir, in its ultimate foolishness, has chosen to make that system even worse at the next election by making it more complicated and less representative. That being said, sir, this particular proposition has more holes in it than a sieve. Sir, the Democratic Accountability and Governance sub-panel that I sat on with Deputy Moore in the previous term of office looked at recommendations for how our system could be improved. There's lots of good stuff in there. And I look at the wording of the specific recommendation that the Chief Minister cites as the inspiration for this proposition, that Deputy Moore cites as the inspiration for this proposition on Chief Minister appointment. That's recommendation 8, which says voters should be provided with the opportunity to indicate their preferred candidate for Chief Minister during the voting process. And, sir, I completely endorse that recommendation. And I believe, sir, that the opportunity should be through party politics, like most sensible democratic jurisdictions in the world understand is the way that you're meant to govern a society. You vote in your election, you give a mandate to a programme for government, which is the party manifesto that is put forward, and you know that when you vote for your local candidate, you're also voting for the manifesto which they align with, and at that moment in time, their leader to be the candidate for Chief Minister to oversee the implementation of that manifesto. And if for whatever reason the Chief Minister is unable to continue, they're incapacitated or they resign or what have you, the role gets taken up by another person elected on the same mandate and with the same manifesto, and the programme for government continues. So that is the only sensible way of delivering on the recommendation from that subcommittee report. And so who knows, one day, and I believe we will get to this position, sir, where actually a lot of the bureaucracy that comes after an election becomes completely unnecessary, and we can do what they do in Gibraltar, sir, which is the Chief Minister is appointed by the governor the day after their general election, because they know who commands the confidence of the Parliament because of the result of that election, and they waste no time. They just get on with the business of government immediately, rather than spending what we do, which is spend 6 months coming up with a common strategic policy that is pulling together of all of the aspirations from people elected on completely disparate manifestos, some of which have little in common and even less credibility among them because they haven't been tested through the tough process of a political party having to put a plan together that's credible and aligned with their values. So that is why this proposition ought to be rejected, because for many of the reasons that Deputy Balash highlighted, it would lead ultimately to chaos in trying to deliver a viable government for Jersey, because of all of the complications that would arise in how the election campaign actually goes, what are the spending limits associated with it, what are, can you put your name down on that ballot having no intention to take the roll up, you just want the extra publicity to help with your actual campaign for membership of the Assembly? That's something that could very easily be exploited in that. And of course, so if a vote of no confidence then takes place, all of the difficulties that follow from that in case another candidate comes forward that still doesn't command the confidence of the Assembly. So the public of Jersey should directly choose what their government is, what their mandate is, and what policies they pursue, but they ought to do that through the mechanism well recognised across the democratic world, the one that will work for Jersey and one that I believe will have sooner and later, which is through the sensible and democratic mechanism of party politics.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I fear that there would only be one winner from this proposition were it to be adopted by the Assembly, and that would be the media, sir. The media already, when in any country, tend to focus on who will be the person at the top, as they often pose it. There would, in such an election, as Deputy Moore's proposal suggests, still be other candidates not running for Chief Minister. But my guess is that were this to be adopted from day one of an election, pretty much all the focus would be on those candidates running for the Chief Minister, and the other 30, 40, 45 candidates running to be deputies or running to be senators or to be connétables, but have no aspiration to be Chief Minister, would quickly be forgotten. And so I think this does significantly risk the undermining of an election in which people do learn about candidates, because I was very disappointed by a lot of what Deputy Messing just said. I agreed with, but equally I was very disappointed with other parts, such as it seemed to be suggesting that the electorate don't think about the people they vote for, that it's just a popularity contest. It's just that. I disagree. There is always an element of popularity in any election, but the electorate do think about the people they vote for. They do read through manifestos. They do make a decision. Even in this mainly independent system we have, they do make decisions depending on what the candidates are saying, rather than just whether they know the candidate or not. And so I think it was unfortunate to hear such words talked about the electorate, because I feel it's deeply unfair. But, as Deputy Balash has said, this would turn the elections into a presidential election. And honestly, in an island of 100,000 people, there is no place for a presidential election. It would be damaging, it would be divisive, and it would ultimately turn the island in many ways against each other, I fear. I also strongly agree that with Deputy Balash that the mechanics of our Assembly and our government are just wrong for this type of poll. At the end of the day, when we vote for a Chief Minister as an Assembly, we are, I imagine, I certainly am, thinking not just about the politics of the candidates up for election, but also how easy are they to work with? What kind of person are they? Can they work with other people? Are they someone who finds it very difficult to work with other people? These are things that the majority of new states members, or recently elected states members who have been served more than one term, would know. For those new states members, it is difficult, I accept that. I felt in my first term when we were doing that vote for Chief Minister, I hadn't worked with either of the candidates. And so I didn't really know which of the two candidates I preferred, because I didn't know how they interacted with people. Their policies weren't so very different to make a clear policy difference. And so that is difficult, but it's something which can be overcome. But ultimately, the public don't know whether someone is easy to work with, whether someone can command the leadership of a government or not. That is something which only comes, I believe, from here and from working here with people. It also, to Deputy Mezek's points, would come from a party perspective as well, because a party elects its leader based on the fact that they know they can work with this person as their leader. If the party gets elected and the leader becomes Chief Minister, then that whole system of understanding how easy it is to work with this person has been carried out internally by the party. And so enables that more direct, though still indirect, way of achieving Chief Minister. So there is no way, sadly, so I have a huge respect for Deputy Moore, and I know that this has been something that she's felt strongly about for quite some time. But I have to say that I do disagree. I don't think this is workable. I think it could end up harming the island quite significantly and harming elections, because it's not really where our system of government is. And so from that perspective, sir, I can't support this proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. What is positive about this
proposition is that it is trying to seek some kind of respect of democracy. Personally, I mean, direct democracy is probably the most democratic form of democracy, but it's also workable in lots of ways, or at least it requires an awful lot of admin. Recently, I finished reading a book called Politics on the Edge by Rory Stewart, and he used a term in it that caught my eye, and he described the combination of ministerial government and party politics as an elected dictatorship. And anybody who wants to understand a bit more about how the party political system is working in the UK, I have to say that book is quite enlightening and quite depressing, actually. But what we also know is, and that's been raised, I believe, in certain reports, whether to the Electoral Commission or by the Electoral Commission, is that when it comes to small numbers, small jurisdictions, the scale of the jurisdiction often doesn't support a political party system. You might have people who are members of parties who get elected, but to have that sort of two-party dominant system that you see in other jurisdictions just doesn't really work. So what we actually seem to have in the form of this proposition is a potentially elected dictatorship without party politics, and I can't say that really commends itself to me either. Just coming back to some of the points that were raised by Deputy Mezek about the merits of party politics, I mean, I think actually when you've got leaders, it ends up as a personality contest anyway in your typical political party system. And certainly I do think that joint manifestos are useful. You don't have to be a party to produce them. But I also will point out that under our current system, whoever stands as chief minister does have to produce a manifesto. And anybody who does stand for chief minister, if they were really looking towards being elected and actually trying to unify the different states members, would be looking to produce something that aligns with the manifestos of other states members. So what we do have is a system which looks to produce a more cohesive assembly, whether you agree that that works or not. A practical issue I see in terms of actually saying, right, you, the candidate, you decide right now, are you going to stand for chief minister? I start thinking, well, if you've got somebody who is thinking, well, I quite like that person who is also standing to be chief minister, and I wouldn't put myself forward because I'd like to support them, and then what happens? That person doesn't get elected. And maybe the other candidate could be the best person to actually become chief minister, or in that person's view either. So what do we all kind of put that in on the basis of, well, you know, it might just happen? So I feel that there are some practical issues there, because the reality of politics is it's so unpredictable, because you are looking to the electorate, and so everybody would probably be hedging their bets. And lastly, the States Assembly has approved a way in which the electorate can indicate support for particular candidates island-wide, and that was by supporting the proposition brought by Deputy Miller recently, whereby islanders can show their support for a candidate. And what we have seen so far, even after the previous system with senators was abolished, when you actually looked at after Deputy Mezek was eliminated from the race, the candidates were left. Well, rather interestingly, they had previously stood as senators, and I think that's what we still tend to look for. So for those reasons, I won't be supporting the proposition, but I do appreciate where it's coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. I rise with a mixture of constitutional concern and a deep sense of what's coming. I rise, I'm afraid, to not agree, with the greatest of respect to my esteemed former Chief Minister colleague, Deputy Moore. I believe that her move is well-meaning, but I fear, as Deputy Balash, the presidential march of Jersey's electoral system and the personalisation of it. Sir, I, like Deputy Balash, have been in a senatorial election, and I understand the allure of a presidential senatorial election. Glittering island-wide votes, sir. Leaders are coming out of that election. Is it going to be on one day or two? I'm not sure yet. But anyway, they're going to come out of this. We've seen them before. And they come out glimmering, emerging, blinking into a sunlight with a democratic halo. Maybe they're going to be de Gaulle. But we don't going to have a second round. That's a problem. But they've had a few revolutions in France. Or is it going to be a bake-off winner, sir? It might appear to be terribly modern, but, sir, unlike other members, I'm a Jerseyman and I respect Jersey traditions. And I don't mind that we're not Gibraltar or the United Kingdom or France. I don't believe that we need to invent or bring a patisserie from France or something from a Cornish pasty from Cornwall or something from Gibraltar. We're Jersey. And our genius, sir, lies in a subtle balance between the parish, and constables are here to stay. They may be moving, unfortunately, in this system because we might have some senators over there. And we have a parish and an island, a government and assembly, ambition and humility based upon what I understood to be a Troy rule of a minority government. For the reasons that Deputy Balash said earlier, as a backbencher, we can bring any proposition, and we need to use that privilege humbly and properly. The Chief Minister is first among equals. They soon know that, sir. Not a president, whilst they used to be presidents. It's not a personal mandate that's forged in a crucible of personality, of politics, or maybe it is. I know that Deputy Balash and I both stood in a senatorial election, and I think both of us in times past topped the poll. I think Senator Balash got more votes than I did. Sir, the ambition to serve the island is not out of a self-interest desire, and I know the Chief Minister, the former Chief Minister, wants to put on that ballot whether or not you want to be Chief Minister. But really, do we want to make our system any more personal? Do we want to make it any more presidential? I don't think so. It will unravel the very balance that this Assembly has enjoyed over so long. And we celebrated our 80 years of post-liberation and how well Jersey has done. I fear about the senatorial 9, and I fear even more if this was to be adopted. Let's be honest, sir. Senatorial elections are somewhat of a beauty parade. They're dressed up in a political manifesto, but they're really a bit like Jersey's version of Who's Got Talent, who can speak. We had a debate yesterday about hustings. We're going to have to come back to the amendment of our PPC chair to deal with hustings. I've spoken before about hustings, how they came along with the 12 parishes. Is that really democracy in our island, sir? I'm not sure. I really doubt it. And I don't think that personality presidential systems is what we want. We've got, how many is it? 110,000 souls, sir. 12 parishes. We've got newly crafted, properly democratic electoral districts with deputies. I agree with Deputy Mezek about that. And I worry about our democratic legitimacy. I fear that we're going to end up, if we approve this proposition, or even if we don't, with a political system about slogans, sound bites, soaring promises that you can do anything, made on platforms, 12 of them. Only then we will crash to the rocks of the legislative reality, sir. Somebody thought you were the Chief Minister the other day, sir, when you were elected as the bailiff, as knowing as bailiff, and I had to explain that, no, you're the presiding officer. The constitutional chaos of which you will be the guardian, or the constitution of the constitution which you're the guardian of, sir, is important. And to change our system, to have a Chief Minister elected on this sort of senatorial mandate is, I don't think, right. Is the runner-up going to be the Deputy Chief Minister? I don't know. Second best? Oh well, sworn in with a shrug and a spreadsheet maybe. The distraction, this elevation of personality over policy. Do we really want Jersey to become a politics of some sort of Jersey bake-off? I suggest that, yes, this may improve voter turnout, but not for the reasons that we actually are here about policy. It will be about sound bites. It'll be about a popularity contest with no real search of policy. That's my fear. I don't want to turn our assembly in any more of a theatre than it already has been in the last few days, and that I fear it will be as we come to try and put legislative arrangements in place 12 months before an election and coming up to that 12 months before. Deputy Moore knows that this is not going to be possible to legislate within 12 months, and as a previous election observer, I would say no to anything that is 12 months before an election and changing a system. This is a massive upturning of the system, just as senators are. I have been a senator, like Deputy Balash. Don't know how many else of them are. Deputy Farnham, Deputy Gorst, Deputy Mezek. I think we all know about the reality of senatorials. It's not a personal brand, sir. You don't have to be in a party. I stand for dignity and public service, not for executive stardom. I'm not going to stand in the senatorial. I want to stand in St Saviour, and not for constable. I want to be a deputy of St Saviour. I want to retain our proud model, our unique system of government, which we don't have. We have not had a system of party politics. We have not had a system of presidential personalities. We have a considered assembly, a respectful assembly that is, at the moment, more disunified, more uncertain than I've ever seen it, actually. We're not rooted in a presidential system, sir. We're not rooted, or ever were really, in showmanship. I would call it collective statecraft at its best when we're good at our job. I'm not a dreamer of something that's not possible. I think that it's a well-intentioned intentioned proposition, but I think the mover of the proposition knows it's not going to get through. And even if it could be done, it can't be legislated in time for the election. It's a fool's gold to have an idea of a presidential system, sir. I urge the deputy to consider whether or not she wants to consider going on anymore. I'm going to be less than 10 minutes as I try, because as a member you can do things, and I'm very pleased I introduced the clock, so they eventually happened, and I'll sit down and urge members, please let's not go here, and I urge the mover of the proposition not really to waste the Assembly's time on something that I think is not really proper for Jersey. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Howell.
Thank you, sir. I would just like to thank Deputy Moore for bringing this proposition, but I regret that I am unable to support it. I'd like to point out that the majority of candidates in Jersey are independent, and as such, it is really important that this Assembly chooses the person they think is the most appropriate to be Chief Minister, the person they think they can best work with. I endorse all that Deputy Balash said, and I wish to say thank you to the PPC for all the hard work they are doing and they continue to do. And I ask you to vote against this proposition, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Tadeo.
So thank you. I know we're not here to talk about senators per se, so Deputy Joseph obviously has spoken a little bit about senators, but it is touched on in the proposition by Deputy Moore, because she is insisting that all chief ministerial candidates need to be, first of all, a senator. We'll talk about that briefly. I did wonder whether I should just stand up and make the shortest speech of my history, which would have been even shorter than what I've said already, which is simply form a political party and get behind your leader and then sit down. I think that's what members need to do. I think that's what candidates need to do at the election. For goodness sake, it's time that Jersey grew into the mature democracy that it should have been and that it still can be. And rather than doing that covertly, because that's what tends to happen, is that we know who the senatorial candidates are going to be at the next election. I think we know who half of them are going to be already, and we know which ones are likely to be successful. And, if I wasn't in the party and I didn't have my particular politics, I'd happily offer to run one of the campaigns for Senator whoever to make Jersey great again. And we'd start our campaign down at St Catherine's Breakwater, I think, and then have some great videos about how we would make the island great again. But I'm not, sir. I've chosen my party and I'm very happy with them, and I'm happy to be running with them. And seeing as we're declaring our political interests, I'll follow Deputy Joseph in saying that I'm very happy to be a deputy for St Brelard. And I hope that if the public of St Brelard are happy to have me again, sir, that I'll be more than willing to serve another 4 years for them and for the island. But that said, I do think the role of senator, now that it's come back on the table, is an important one. And I think that we've got some very excellent senators, potential senators in this assembly. I look to my colleagues who are currently deputy of St Brelard, and I think all three of them would make excellent senatorial candidates. I would certainly vote for them, sir. And they would potentially make very good chief ministers as well, sir, in their different ways. And I'll be happy to work with all of them, sir. Let's get back to the question in hand, sir, before I perhaps inadvertently mislead the House, in case that things aren't taken with a pinch of salt. Sir, the basics of this proposition is that the public should choose their chief minister. And because politics can be quite lonely, I used to talk to Alexa, but now I've started talking to ChatGTP. And I asked it, are there any democracies in the world that elect their prime minister directly by a direct vote? And Chat came back to me and said, no parliamentary democracy elects its prime minister by direct popular vote. In all democratic systems with a prime minister, and I think we can say we've got a chief minister who's the equivalent, the PM is typically the leader of the majority party or a coalition in the legislature, not chosen directly by the public. It then goes on to say, the closest exception or unique cases, Israel, briefly from 1996 to 2001, direct election of the Prime Minister occurred separately from Parliament. This was an experiment and was abandoned due to political instability. And then it reiterates with another bullet point, no country currently does this. So why is it that we think that we should be different? Or rather, why is it that Deputy Moore thinks that we should be the first country, if we are a country or state or democracy in the world, that should elect our Prime Minister directly? Because, of course, I think there's an axiomatic problem there. As soon as you elect your Prime Minister directly, you no longer have a Prime Minister, you no longer have a Chief Minister, you have a President. And therefore, we might need to start to talk about Jersey as being a Republic of Jersey. Perhaps they would be called a potato republic by those who are not very fond of us, or we could call ourselves something else. I don't think we have that set up at the moment. We have very much a parliamentary democracy system along the Commonwealth lines and Commonwealth model. But let's look at what happened in Israel, because that's the only example which ChatGTP, or the internet as we might also call it, and in this case Wikipedia, I went to for more information, sir. And it says, indeed, so in 1996, on the 29th of May, so not too dissimilar to our period for election, general elections were held in Israel. For the first time, the Prime Minister was elected on a separate ballot from the remaining members of the Knesset, and the election for Prime Minister resulted in a surprise victory for who do we think it was? It was Benjamin Netanyahu, by a margin of less than 1% of the total number of votes cast. So not only did they abandon it, but it actually resulted in somebody being elected who is a genocidal maniac and who is currently a wanted war criminal by the UN by the UN Court of Human Rights. He's somebody who still travels to the US and meets with somebody who is a president of his own country, who was a wanted criminal until he got elected, and they can have cozy tete-a-tetes. But in the meantime, This individual, as we know, sir, is responsible for an ongoing humanitarian crisis in the Middle East, and we're seeing the results of starving children to add to that genocide there. And it doesn't need to mean that that will automatically be the outcome, but I'd suggest that actually when it's been tried in the past, it hasn't had great results in other parts of the world. So the question then becomes, how would the actual Chief Minister be elected in reality? So the first question I would ask is, if we are going to let the public choose who the Chief Minister is, why does it need to be a senatorial candidate? It may well be that the public have some deputy or constable candidates who they think are actually an excellent constable. You know, I think Constable Jean would potentially make a great Chief Minister. He shouldn't need to go through the rigmarole of standing for senator for that. And of course, if he were to run as Constable Jean of St John with the Reform Party, I'd be quite happy to vote for him if indeed he was our leader, which I'm not sure that he would be, and I'm not suggesting we replace our leader, sir. But there are lots of people who would be happy to see Constable Jean leading the island, sir. You get the point I'm making. I hope I'm not going to be fired from the party, by the way. I'm just giving some hypothetical examples about how other people might think. So that's one point. I think the necessity for somebody to run for senator would be obviated, so I think that's too restrictive. The next point I would really ask is about the voting system. So how would we ensure that the person who's selected for Chief Minister, would it be simply the one who gets the most votes in the poll with the first past the post? What would happen if that person doesn't have a clear majority? It's entirely possible. Would it be a yes and no per candidate? We've also then got to consider what game theory might look like, because in theory you could have a situation where it would either be entirely inadvisable for any candidate to declare their candidacy, because you may not have decided, as Deputy Scott pointed out, until a senator who is simply one of 9 senators who will be working with another 37 elected members of the Assembly. I think it's 37, isn't it, roughly? Let's do the maths. It's 40 other members in the Assembly. They don't know who they're working with, and so that they can't say that they're going to be able to form a majority, or indeed they won't need a majority to get elected as Chief Minister, but they'll need a majority to command and to maintain that role in the Assembly. So it seems to me inherently unworkable in that respect to be able to do that. I think those are really, do we need any more reasons not to vote for this? I'm not sure that we do. I think what we've identified a problem here, which is that some people think that they would like to be able to vote directly for the Chief Minister. That's not the kind of political system we've had. As I've said, we've got a system on offer, which is vote for our party if you think our party is able to deliver the changes to the island and maintain the systems that you think work and make the changes that you think are necessary. We've got a manifesto to do that. We will have a manifesto to do that, and we'll have leaders and ministers who are ready to go if we get a majority or if we get enough seats to work in a coalition. And if we don't, we'll be quite happy to work on the backbenches and in scrutiny. Clearly, the former would be ideal from our point of view, but that's how party politics works, sir. And as I said, going back to my first point, find people you can work with, whether they exist in the Assembly or not. If they exist outside of the Assembly, find them, reach out to them, build your parties, build your associations, whatever you want to call them. Get behind your leader, get behind your candidates, and support them in the 2026 election.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this proposition? I call upon Deputy Moore to reply. Deputy Moore.
Thank you, sir, and I'm grateful to all those who've taken the time to share their views and considerations in this debate. But I must say that I don't consider Deputy Balash to ever be grumpy. So our system of government is where it is, and the public consistently tell us that they don't trust it. They don't feel it delivers change, and they feel that there's an old boys club that does deals behind closed doors. This proposition simply tries to open some of those doors. I agree that we are a unique island and we have strong traditions, but we also are an outward-looking island that has historically been enterprising and dynamic. Such a system, I believe, is workable, and it's been proven to be so in the unincorporated US territories associated with the states of Guam, Puerto Rico, and American Samoa. Perhaps Deputy Tadia missed my opening speech. I say to the PPC, why had they not spent time considering the findings of the Democratic Accountability and Governance Report, which have brought forward proposals to improve our system? There are so many excellent recommendations in that report. It is a great shame that they have been left on the shelf. On the timing, they would have also been able and welcome to amend this proposition to 2030. But I do recall that just this morning we were debating their own proposals for change at the next election. Our system, as it has been described by one political historian, is already one of extreme individualism. It has been throughout history, they tell me. Even when we had parties in the past, people got behind an individual rather than the issues of the day. That may be the current zeitgeist around the world in a post-liberal era, but the aim of this poll is not to focus on the individuals who are considered by islanders in a democratic election, but the issues and the direction that they propose to the people, and most importantly, how the public responds to them. Running a proper campaign based on issues would allow other independent candidates to get behind their Chief Minister candidate. And if we're going to have senators again, I do believe that the candidates in this poll should have an island-wide mandate. Although in the context of the Democratic Accountability and Governance Report, this proposal was made at the time which was considering our current system, so the Chief Minister poll would have been the only island-wide vote that would have been available to islanders, and it would have indeed appeased some of those islanders who, as we all recall in 2022, mourned the loss of their island-wide mandate. I do hear the argument of Deputy Mezek, who naturally champions a party-based system, but our history has shown that party politics in a small island nation can be fraught with difficulty, and it is not the system that we have. As it is, I would suggest that we probably have about 5 or maybe 6 political groupings in this assembly at the moment, so it will remain a consensus-building chamber, whatever the outcomes of the next election. One constituent kindly also asked AI to crunch through the report and the information that it could find around the world. This is the conclusion of that report, which weighed up the pros and cons of a directly elected Chief Minister system, and I quote, "Adopting direct election of the Chief Minister is a bold reform aimed squarely at improving civic engagement. The proposition offers a reasonable, balanced approach. It keeps the election concurrent with the general election to maximise turnout and minimise cost and disruption. And it preserves parliamentary checks. The Assembly still exists in full authority and can trigger a new election if absolutely necessary. The evidence from other democracies suggests Jersey stands to gain in terms of voter participation and political legitimacy. While caution is warranted in implementation, the potential downsides can be mitigated through clear rules and the natural adaptation of Jersey's political culture to the new system. Therefore, to invigorate Jersey's democracy and give the public a more direct voice in its government, voting for Proposition P33 is the recommended course of action." End of quote. That's a genuinely impartial view, and I hope that the Assembly will consider it. Given the clear indications, however, sir, that have been offered in the debate, I would be content for a standing vote.
Would you be content for a standing vote? All right.
Sir, I'll be content to make another donation, sir. I'm not
Another
getting mine
£10
answered. I
donation from
apologise.
Deputy Joseph. Has the appel been called for? The appel has been called for. I invite members to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. all members have the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. I announce that the proposition has not been adopted. 1 vote poor and 43 votes contra.
Perhaps, sir, I can thank everyone for their time.
That concludes public business for this meeting. I'd like the Chair of PPC to propose the arrangements of public business for future meetings. Chair.
Thank you, sir. At the moment, there are 8 items listed for our next meeting on the 3rd of June. However, I would like to advise members that I am going to move P35 amendments to standing orders, revised code of conduct to the sitting on July the 8th to enable PPC to have full consultation and workshops for members and with the Commissioner for Standards. So at the moment we have the items listed for 3rd of June are P5, which is amendment to standing orders, P22, draft Jersey Gas Company amendment, P30, draft income support Jersey amendment regulations, P31, draft highways law Jersey amendment regulations, P34, consultation and report on pre-sale agreements for land and property transactions, and P36, French national identity cards as valid travel documentation for French citizens, which is P36, and P38, differential pay for ministers, scrutiny chairs and committee chairs. Thank you, and I propose the arrangement of business.
Members, Deputy Oz, if you wish to speak.
Thank you, sir. I'm grateful for the chair of PPC because I've just lodged amendments to the one of the matters that she's brought forward, and I welcome that. And may I also, sir, ask, Deputy Balash has a proposition standing in his name on French identity cards, which is very important, and I've asked for an amendment on that, and I just wondered whether that was going to be in order, whether or not I can amend. It's a supplementary one. I'm going to consult with Deputy Balash prior to it, but it's just so that it's a further amendment to his proposal, and I just thought it was polite to say that. And I know that I'm out of time for a proposition on the fuel farm, but I may have to beg members in indulgence for a reduced lodging period if I don't get any discussions with the Chief Minister, sir.
Thank you for letting us know. Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. I just want to inform members that on Tuesday of the Assembly, immediately after the Assembly, is the wonderful CPA AGM. You are all members, you're all welcome for an evening of sparkling conversation. Refreshments will be provided, and your engagement in the CPA is more than welcome, much appreciated. And I know a lot of people have been involved this year and in the previous few years, so please come along. That's on the Tuesday of the next sitting. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Ward. Are members now content to adjourn? The Assembly stands adjourned until 9:30 on the 2nd of June. Tuesday, the 3rd of June.